Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us. This is News Channel Nebraska. My name is Eric McKay. Let's take a look at our top headlines today. A man charged with 2 murders in northeast Nebraska staying silent at his arraignment. Elias Reed, accused of murdering Curtis Strom and William Reffitt last February at a Bloomfield bowling alley when authorities say he shot the two. Reed had the option of entering a plea at his arraignment, according to the Knox County News. They say he chose to say nothing during the plea portion, also waived his right to a speedy trial. The Knox County News reporting his attorney requested the trial to happen in July so they could also monitor the case against Kaylin Sweezy, who was with Reed the day of the shooting. Her trial begins in March. The Hitchcock County Sheriff's Office looking for help. They're trying to find this trailer they say was stolen from outside a shop in Trenton. A person posting pictures of the H&H 14-foot dump trailer that was swiped recently, asking anyone with information to contact the sheriff's office. Authorities say there are noticeable signs of rust, different colored rims on one side, and 2 levels of wooden boards attached. Nebraska's fight to build the Perkins County Canal taking a new stage, the state now offering to potentially buy property in Colorado. The Department of Natural Resources sent letters to 6 landowners in Colorado where the canal would begin, offering $1.4 million for about 650 acres. That's according to Nebraska Public Media. The state citing an agreement signed in the 1920s that gives the owners 90 days to accept the offer, or officials would look into eminent domain. The document gives Nebraska the right to enact if needed, state officials say. The letters were sent earlier this month, giving the owners until mid-April to make a decision. A new report has found students still struggling to bounce back after the pandemic, especially when it comes to reading. The 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as the nation's report card, just released, looks at 4th and 8th graders nationwide and how they're doing in math and reading. Average reading scores have declined at both grade levels compared to the last report 3 years ago. This continues a slide in reading achievement that started before the pandemic. As for math, average scores went up for 4th graders since 2022. No significant change for 8th graders. The brightest spot, the report found absenteeism has gone down since the last assessment. President Donald Trump putting the return to office debate front and center with the recent signing of an executive order that called on the heads of federal departments and agencies to bring their workers back to the office full time. Karen Kaifa has a look at some of the recent trends and challenges.
Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, and UPS are among companies that have said employees have to be back in the office 5 days a week. And other companies are also starting to tip the scales on hybrid work. There are challenges for both employees and employers and questions that both sides need to ask and answer. When it comes to facing return to office mandates, federal employees aren't alone in 2025. The Pew Research Center recently found the number of employees expected in person at the office a certain number of days per week or month has grown since early 2023, while a majority of workers surveyed still prefer a hybrid arrangement.
It's the work-life balance that comes with being able to work from home, being able to have a hybrid work environment that's really appealing to workers.
Kim Parker, director of Pew's Social Trends Research, says women especially cite potential challenges of returning to the office full time.
We did find that women were a little more likely than men to say that they would probably leave their job if they no longer had the option of working at home. And we know from our prior research that the caregiving burden does fall more heavily on women.
Sarah Perry, a professor of management at Baylor University, says employers should be specific about any major switch in policy.
The reasons why, what we're hoping to get out of it, and how we're going to do this. How's it going to look? How are we going to take care of you in the midst of this? So what are the types of flexibility that you'll still have?
And employees should inquire about any new lines between time on and time off.
Employees should trigger these conversations so that they are had. What are the expectations now as a team, as coworkers? Are we going to respond to emails at night? Are we going to try to maybe build better boundaries back in?
Perry also says that pre-pandemic, the commute was often the line for workers between work and home life. And she says that adding that transition back into employees' lives may actually help with better work-life balance. In Washington, I'm Karen Kaifa.
Parents in one Midwest state may soon be required to show proof of citizen status when they enroll their children in school. The Oklahoma State Board of Education approved the new rule yesterday. Paige Taylor has reaction from education leaders.
Walters has been vocal about illegal immigration in Oklahoma schools, even suing the federal government for $474 million he says is associated with the cost to educate illegal immigrant children. An approved rule requires families to present documentation to schools about their citizenship status, similar to providing documentation on where they live or their immunization status. Walters says the new administrative rule is to gather data, and students will not be turned away from being educated in Oklahoma public schools if they are not a legal citizen.
Clearly, you are supposed to enter the country legally. We are providing information and documentation over the students in our schools. It is incredibly necessary for us to continue to move up in the education rankings, to continue to be successful with all students, to have this information.
Walters was asked by a board member if the information will remain private or be shared, and if the information gathered could lead to immigration raids in schools. He says the information will be provided to law enforcement and the Trump administration as needed.
It is a felony to not work with law enforcement on an investigation. So, we will work with, that's outside of my scope. That's not my authority there. But if a law enforcement official comes in and asks for information, we are legally required to give that information over.
He says having this information will benefit schools by allowing them to see where they need to allocate resources based on the students they are educating.
What we see with illegal immigration is it continues to occur throughout the year. School districts all of a sudden come in on a Monday and go, well, now we have 80 more kids that don't speak English. By the way, that doesn't necessarily mean they speak Spanish. They're coming from countries all over the world. And so now all of a sudden, they've got to go find another teacher or more resources that they didn't plan for. Because remember, they couldn't ask this information beginning of the year.
Coming up, after a chaotic day yesterday, a federal judge temporarily blocked part of the administration's plans to freeze all federal aid. The decision came out of a hastily scheduled hearing just minutes before the administration's plans to freeze all federal grants and loans as of 4 p.m. Central Time was set to take effect. An internal memorandum said this week that the pause would, quote, provide the administration time to review agency programs and determine the best uses of the funding for those programs, end quote. But the action caused widespread outrage and confusion among agencies across the globe that rely on federal funds. Sherelle Hubbard has more.
It will not stand. It cannot stand.
Former vice presidential candidate and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz fired up over the Trump administration's freeze on all federal grants and loans.
It's an outrageous power grab.
The move potentially impacting trillions of dollars in government spending and public programs serving millions of Americans. The new White House press secretary defending the freeze.
It means no more funding for illegal DEI programs, for the Green New scam, for transgenderism and wokeness.
The administration later tried to clarify, saying there would be, quote, zero impact on programs like Social Security and Medicare.
Donald Trump's administration is lying to you. The White House's attempt to walk back what they did today does not match what we saw on the ground.
But Illinois' governor was just one of many who reported being unable to access federal Medicaid funds on Tuesday. Lawmakers say the freeze could set the stage for a showdown at the highest court.
It's illegal. It's unconstitutional.
The judge said the pause will preserve the status quo while she considers the challenge to the freeze plan. She's expected to issue a more permanent decision on Monday.
I have a lot of questions because not one damn person thought this through.
I'm Sherelle Hubbard reporting.
Yesterday's decision on pausing federal grants created a day of uncertainty for many agencies, if not panic for some. Among those paying close attention were educational institutions like Southeast Community College, where President Dr. Paul Illich told his board the school was getting as much information as it could.
What we do know now is that our Pell Grants, students that receive Pell Grants and student loans, those students will not be impacted. It does not impact anything associated with those programs, and we're still studying everything that it might impact. Again, we're just learning a lot, but what we do know is not impacting those students, and we are working with our students to make sure if they have questions, we can answer those questions.
Associate Vice President of Student Enrollment Mike Pegram says the college got several questions from students concerned about the proposed freeze. The school was answering their questions and preparing to notify students that Pell Grants and loans were not expected to be affected. President Trump signed an executive order yesterday restricting gender transitions for minors. The order, seeking to end federal support for medical procedures aimed at altering sex or gender, which includes surgery or the use of puberty blockers or sex hormones. The action impacts minors, anyone under the age of 19. The order also calls for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to, in the words of the document, take all appropriate actions to end the use of gender-affirming care for young people. It also instructs the agency to withdraw its guidance on gender-affirming care and patient privacy. It's the first legislation Congress took up this session, and today it's likely to become the first that President Donald Trump signs into law. Amy Kiley has a look at the Laken Riley Act.
Criminal networks that have brought devastating crime to American soil. We're getting them all out.
A White House official says President Donald Trump will sign the Laken Riley Act today. It requires the Department of Homeland Security to detain undocumented migrants for certain crimes. They include offenses like theft and burglary, or those resulting in death or serious injury. It applies to people in the country unlawfully or without legal status.
Our hearts, our prayers continue for Laken's family.
The immigration bill is likely the first legislation to get Trump's signature this term. Most lawmakers who voted for the measure are Republicans, but dozens are Democrats.
Americans are very clear. They want more border security, but they also want an opportunity for sane immigration reform that stabilizes and fixes our broken immigration system.
The legislation is named after a 22-year-old Georgia student who was killed last year. An undocumented migrant from Venezuela is serving a life sentence for her murder. The bill signing comes as ICE reports thousands of arrests this week. Agents have a quota of 75 a day.
The goal is to arrest at least that many, but hopefully many more.
Experts say there's no connection between immigration and crime. In fact, some research shows sometimes immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than people born in the U.S.
Because of bad apples, not all of us should pay.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
A convicted felon in Nebraska is among those being deported this week. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office says Nathaniel Topete Perez stole from construction sites over the past year, including in Elkhorn. After the April tornado outbreak, he was found guilty of a felony. Authorities say he called the sheriff's office this week to see if he could get his tools back, since they were like the stolen ones. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents arrested him. The deportation process is already underway. Scary health news in our neighbors to the south. Kansas in the middle of a deadly tuberculosis outbreak. The state health department says 2 people have died. Dozens of others have gotten sick. Health officials say 67 active cases have been reported in the Kansas City metro since last January. Despite the outbreak, the risk of the disease being transmitted is still low. The symptoms: persistent cough, fever, fatigue, and body aches. Anyone who thinks they might have TB should talk to their doctor about getting tested. It's costing more to stay awake at work. Coffee prices hit a new high this week. Compared to last week, futures prices for Arabica coffee from Latin America jumped nearly 2%. The increase came after President Donald Trump said he'd impose a 25% tariff on Colombia. The White House did end up pausing that decision. Colombia, the 3rd largest coffee-producing country in the world. The World Bank said Arabica coffee had already gone up 13% in December. With a full house in attendance at the VFW in Norfolk, the Norfolk Elks recognized the hard work of local first responders and the building blocks of the Norfolk Foster Care Program, awarding them grants from their annual Spotlight Initiative.
We like giving them first aid supplies, tourniquets, Band-Aids, first aid kit, blankets. But we also, as Elks, like to say thank you by doing a meal for them and everything. And this year was a little bit different. This year we invited other guest speakers so our first responders know what other organizations are out there that we support, and so they can get eyes on the people and everything.
Organizers said the Elks were able to highlight 6 different first responders in total. And as a reminder, you can stay up to date with the very latest by following us online. Head to newschannelnebraska.com and click on the News tab there. You can also follow us on X, like us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. This is News Channel Nebraska.